Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Alot About Nothing. This is Scott, and that's it, because it's just me for this episode. I'm going to be trying something a little bit different here for this one. Instead of doing the usual podcast format, where it was me, usually Mike, maybe Derek a couple of times, I'm just going to take the lead here on this one, because I found a topic that I found interesting, and I figured I'd make a video about it. So maybe it's not an A Lot About Nothing podcast episode, but we'll call it something along the lines of a little bit about something. Because it's not a lot about nothing. It all depends. If you're not a big history buff, please excuse this episode. But I just find certain events interesting, and I decided to do a little bit of research on a local topic, a local event that happened 50 years ago, a little bit more actually. It was around the World War II period, and the history of the actual place goes back further than that, but I'm going to go right into it here. So this episode's actually about the Hercules Powder Plant in Kenvil, New Jersey. If you don't know what it is, it's a black powder factory. Anyway, let's just get into it. The screen door suddenly opened, and I looked up to see who was coming. All I can remember is being under the kitchen table. Our house had sustained severe damage. My mother was crying and her arm was bleeding, Harry Pascoe recalls. Pascoe was eating lunch with his family at around 1:30 on September 12, 1940, before his father was scheduled to work his 3 to 11 shift at the Hercules Powder Plant. Unbeknownst to the Pascoe family and other residents of the Roxbury Township area, they were about to experience the aftermath of the deadliest single disaster in the history of Morris County, and one of the deadliest in New Jersey's history. A little bit of background about the Hercules Powder Plant. Founded in 1871, the Hercules Powder Company plant was located on a 1,200-acre plot of land located in Kenvil, at the time known as McCainville, section of Roxbury Township, New Jersey. Fun fact, the plant's name Hercules is obviously a reference to the Greek mythological figure, but is also a reference to a competitive jab of sorts from early explosives manufacturing. A special formulation of dynamite was patented in 1874 by J.W. Willard, superintendent of the California Powder Works in Santa Cruz, California. He called his invention Hercules Powder, a competitive jab that rivaled Giant Powder Company, which had acquired the exclusive U.S. rights to Alfred Nobel's original dynamite formula. Alfred Nobel, the award, the Nobel Peace Prize, is actually named after Alfred Nobel. So if you didn't know that, Alfred Nobel was the original creator of dynamite, the original form of dynamite. So a lot of people think Nobel Peace Prize, but one of his inventions was dynamite, one of the biggest things used during wartime to take lives away from what some people define as enemies. But Alfred Nobel's family actually created the award. I believe he established it himself in order to kind of repent for creating one of the deadliest creations in mankind history. But the mythological Hercules was known as a giant slayer, and having the rival company Giant Powder Company, J.W. Woolward figured it would be funny to name his invention Hercules Powder because Hercules famously fought and won against the giant in all those old mythological stories. Anyway, the original Hercules Powder Company plant's placement in Kenvil was no accident. Kenvil and its surrounding area lay upon one of the richest iron ore deposits in the country. Therefore, having an explosives, namely dynamite, and gunpowder manufacturer located right in the middle of all the mining sites was both convenient for mining companies and very profitable for the manufacturer, being the Hercules Powder Company. The plant changed ownership a few times. It always retained the name Hercules in some way. The notable parent company, DuPont, and yes, the modern company, DuPont, that's the same one. It acquired the rights to the Explosives and Gunpowder Company in the 1880s and held on to them until 1911 when the United States won a lawsuit that it brought against the DuPont Corporation under the Sherman Antitrust Act. Just in case you don't know, the Sherman Antitrust Act is a U.S. antitrust law passed by Congress in 1890, which was created in order to prohibit anti-competitive agreements, and to prohibit companies from monopolizing or attempting to monopolize a specific market. In this case, DuPont, via the Hercules Powder Company, held the majority of the explosives/gunpowder market. This monopoly breakup led to the creation of two new companies in 1912, Atlas Powder Company and Hercules Powder Company. Atlas received the explosives manufacturing portion from the DuPont Company, while the new Hercules inherited the gunpowder portion. As you can probably tell, being a major gunpowder manufacturer in the early 1900s was sure to bring much economical success for years, actually decades to come. Business was quite literally booming. Get it? Booming? Yeah, explosive. Though, unfortunately, it did come at a price, which is the ultimate prices, which is life itself. Going back, I'm going to be talking about mainly one specific event that happened in this place's history, but there was multiple, and they started at early on in its lifetime. But if you're like me as a child, you might recall learning a lesson along the lines of, if you play with fire, you're bound to get burned. Or, in my case, if you put a Leatherman tool into an electrical socket, you will probably get electrocuted. But, yeah, that's a long story. I could go on a tangent about that. Let's just say I was shocked by the results. I'm sure you can understand the lesson behind these sayings, but in case you don't, basically it's just saying that if you spend enough time around or interacting with dangerous items or products, eventually something will go wrong, and the risk will become a reality. This lesson reigns true in the Kenvil Hercules Powder Plant's case, because if you spend enough time operating and working with explosive products, eventually you can expect an accident to happen, or multiple. The following is the entry for Kenvil in a New Jersey guidebook published in 1939. New Jersey guidebook being just something for tourists and anybody who was interested in local history and stuff like that. Just like a little pamphlet about all the different areas you can visit, whatnot. So for Kenvil, it says 720 feet altitude, 1,000 population. Formerly known as McCainville, advertises itself as the home of America's oldest continuously operating dynamite plant, the Hercules Powder Company plant, founded 1871. Two major explosions brought the plant into the headlines in 1934. On March 8th, 4 workers were killed in a packing house blast that broke every pane of window glass in neighboring towns and shook a marine observation tower at Sandy Hook, 50 miles east. A sign was erected at the factory gate announcing that the accident was the first in 180 days and that there had been no serious explosion on the grounds for 14 years. 5 months later, a detonation in the smokeless powder unit killed 2 men and injured 3. The E.I. DuPont des Numériques Company has had a large interest in Hercules, and yes, that DuPont company is much easier to pronounce now that it's just DuPont and not the whole E.I. or whatever. But 2 large, deadly explosions in 1 year is bad enough, but it was just a precursor to what would happen on September 12th, 1940. On Thursday, September 12th, 1940, it was just another work day for the 400 employees who clocked into work at the Hercules Powder Plant that day. Business for the company was going very well, as World War II had been raging in Europe for about a year now, and the U.S. Army had placed an order at the plant for smokeless gunpowder worth $2 million, or, if you're like me, you like to know the equivalent money in terms of today's money. $2 million back then is about $37,210,571 in 2021, which is the time that I'm writing this. The Kenvil site was the only one out of 6 sites run by the Hercules company that produced the smokeless gunpowder as well as dynamite. Overall, in just the previous 3 months up until Thursday, September 12, 1940, all 6 sites had brought in military contracts worth $40 million, or $744,211,429 million in 2021. Therefore, the Hercules company was stepping up its production in order to meet these demands and hopefully earn more lucrative government contracts as the war progressed. Only 1 week previous, the Kenvil's plant had completed and opened up a brand new unit, the Solvent Recovery Unit building. It was 1-story brick structure, 150 feet by 40 feet, with a corrugated iron roof where 16,000 pounds of smokeless gunpowder was being subjected to a drying out process. Quick side note on the production of gunpowder. I know, very interesting topic, but the ingredients of black powder or gunpowder are moistened before mixing together for safety reasons. In addition, some chemicals within the mixture can actually, depending on the purity of said ingredients, absorb moisture from the atmosphere. Black powder and gunpowder is much more effective when there is less moisture content. Therefore, it was very common practice to utilize different techniques in order to get as much moisture out of the powder as possible. This is why it would be important for Hercules Company to speed up and maximize the drying efforts in its own separate unit. But it would be in this new unit that the catastrophic events that occurred on that September day would begin. It was around 1:30 p.m. when workers from nearby buildings heard a dull roar resonating from the new solvent recovery building, followed by the sight of flames from the windows, and almost immediately after, an earth-shaking blast that tore the building to pieces. This blast set off an almost domino-like chain effect as numerous other buildings in the complex exploded as a result of the first. Within seconds, nearly 20 buildings disappeared without a trace, and only craters were left where their foundations once stood, some of the craters being up to 13 feet deep. In total, almost 270,000 pounds of gunpowder exploded. Workers were thrown hundreds of feet away from where they were standing at the time of the explosion. The explosions shook the area so forcefully that cars were bounced off the roads, most windows in homes miles away were broken, and items flew off the shelves. The explosions were felt as far away as Poughkeepsie, New York, which, again, I'm from this area, so that's pretty far away. And they were picked up by a seismograph, the machines, used to record how large an earthquake is. So, to be picked up on the seismograph at Fordham University in New York, which is in Brooklyn, New York, about 50 miles east of Kenvil, that's pretty impressive. Not only were windows broken, but telephone wires were torn apart from their poles. Many windows in both Roxbury and Wharton high schools were shattered. Some told of high school students whose fathers worked at the powder works, suddenly realizing what had happened, shrieking and running out of the building to the plant to check on loved ones. 10 of the dead were found on a wooded hill about 300 feet from the solvent recovery building where the first explosion occurred. Rescue workers believe that the 10 men had run to the hill when the fire started and had been caught by the full force of the big explosion before they reached the summit. Their deaths prevented investigators from learning what had happened at the origin of the disaster. One rescue worker who had helped remove the 10 bodies from the hillside said, "When we quit work at dark, we still saw the twisted bodies of more dead farther on in the black underbrush. I don't know how many more bodies will be found in the underbrush, but my guess is it will be a considerable number." While the search for missing, dead, and injured continued on site, victims were being rushed to the local hospital to seek care. The victims were brought to Dover General Hospital, which was so overwhelmed that many individuals were just laid out in the front lawn of the hospital awaiting help. Victims were brought in laying on the back of pickup trucks and cars. Not only were most doctors and nurses from neighboring facilities called to assist, but nursing students from around the area spent weeks attending to burn patients. Even older Boy Scouts were used to find family members and relay messages. A local resident, Sal Valentino, recalls the event. "One of the injured was my brother Anthony, who was blown 50 feet into the air and landed on the hot bed of ashes with fire all around him. He thought he was dying and called out for help from our sister, Dolly, who had passed away the previous year, 1939. Suddenly he saw an opening in the fire and crawled through. He suffered burns to his face and elbow and had permanent damage to his ear. His picture being led away from the fire covered the whole front page of the New York Daily News on September 13th, 1940. At age 5, my first memory in life was seeing him looking out the window of Dover General Hospital with his face all covered with white bandages. Out of the 400 workers who were on shift that day, 51 lost their lives, with over 200 being injured and burned. The damages caused by the explosion were estimated to total of around $1 million or $18,605,286 in 2021. A large investigation was started into this event, as I'm sure you could tell. While a definitive cause of the explosion was never determined, many people had their own theories of what caused the blast. One of the most popular theories shared by many in the public was that it was a result of an act of sabotage by the German American Bund. The German American Bund was a German American Nazi organization established in 1936, whose main goal was to promote a favorable view of Nazi Germany. Awaiting an opportunity to get into the grounds, investigators questioned surviving workers, some of whom said that several employees of the Hercules and the Picatinny Army Arsenal at Dover, which is nearby, had been discharged recently as an aftermath of a joint Ku Klux Klan German American Bund meeting at the Bund's Camp Nordland, which is a 204-acre resort facility located in Andover Township, New Jersey, or approximately 10 miles away from the Kenvil site. The workers said that the FBI men had watched the meeting and had noticed several cars bearing the small identification plates issued to munitions plant workers entering the Bund camp. A checkup of those identification plates led to the dismissals, according to the workers. The investigators sought any shred of evidence to discover if this was another Black Tom case. Major Charles H. Schleffel of the state police said, "Some of the people employed in that Hercules plant did not look so good," Hunt said. "We checked thoroughly the lists of German American Bund members supplied by Sheriff Denton J. Quick of Sussex County," which is the location, that's the county that the location of Camp Nordland is in, "and we failed to find a single Bund member on our payrolls. I'm satisfied that there is no sign of sabotage." The words "another Black Tom case" refers to another large explosion that occurred in New Jersey back in 1916 during the First World War. The notorious Black Tom explosion at Jersey City, New Jersey on July 30th, 1916, was subsequently traced to the German saboteurs. It resulted only a year prior to the Hercules explosion in a German-American Mixed Claims Commission awarding $50 million in damages to persons and firms who were victims of the attack. The Black Tom explosion itself killed only 4 and injured 100 persons. But again, in the end, no evidence of sabotage was found, and because there was no way to tell the exact cause of the explosion, the official investigation resulted with a cause undetermined. I am in no way a professional investigator, nor do I claim to know everything about this case and the specifics of the investigation or the operations of the Hercules company that I haven't been able to find through my research. However, after concluding my research into this event, specifically the explosion of 1940, I've been able to draw my own conclusion and opinion, and I would like to share them because what's the point of making a video if you don't share your opinion? So while the thought of a sabotage attack by an American Nazi organization would make for an incredible story and make sense in a few ways, I truly feel that that's all there really is to it, a story. It's a convenient narrative that fits into the time period and atmosphere of this event, being World War II and 1940. The only connections between the German-American Bund and the Hercules plant in Kenvil is the close proximity of one of the Nazi groups' camps and the fact that an armaments factory supplying products to fight the war in Europe would be the perfect target to positively impact the Nazi war efforts and make a statement. But I believe this theory is a result of the human mind's reaction to a very traumatic situation. Unfortunately, in life, things happen that either seemingly have no explanation or, like in this case, very little to no evidence exists, meaning there's no way to ever find the true explanation for what caused an event. This puts the human mind in an uncomfortable situation where, despite the inability to provide a cause, the mind creates one, whether it's a feasible or not, in order to try and cope with the traumatic event at hand. An accident, quote unquote, is seen as an event that happens with a negative result that was caused by no malintent or ill intention on the part of any person involved. But when one occurs that results in so many deaths and injuries, it is sometimes hard for the mind, the human mind, to comprehend that there wasn't any major conspiracy behind it or any bigger reason behind it. So therefore, there must be some source of evil there. But I believe that the 1940 Hercules plant explosion truly was just a catastrophic industrial accident. I mean, to go back to something I mentioned earlier, if you spend enough time working with and producing dangerous materials, something bad will happen. The Second World War was in its first year, and the U.S. military needed as much gunpowder and explosives as possible in order to supply its own forces as well as the forces of our allies. This meant that there was the opportunity for huge economical gains by companies who could supply these products in large quantities as fast as possible. Due to this, the Hercules company had increased its workload and, as a result, opened itself up to accidents caused by misjudgment and negligent actions. For example, the drying process of gunpowder is known to be one of the most dangerous parts of the creation process. Due to the need to introduce heat to conduct the process, heat needed to produce the drying process, all it would need is a spark and a catastrophe would ensue. And I believe it did. But to kind of wrap things up, ultimately, the facility was rebuilt with new safety measures and reopened in April 1941 to go on to produce munitions for World War II, as well as rocket propellant and other products. By 1958, the Cold War was in full swing, and the Hercules Kenvil plant worked on materials for the Minuteman missile. Smaller explosions continued from the late 1940s through the 60s, taking over a dozen additional lives. In 1964, 2 workers were killed in a fire in the building where smokeless gunpowder was being prepared. In 1967, an explosion and fire leveled 3 buildings and killed 2 workers. More recently, a 1989 blast injured 20 workers and shattered glass for miles. And in 1994, a machine mixing 500 pounds of nitroglycerin went up, sending 4 workers to the hospital and showering the company parking lot with scraps of hot metal. Operations at the facility ceased in 1996. The land is now fenced off and gated. Plans are being made for future uses for the large plot, with some sites needing remediation for contaminants that were left behind. On September 5th, 2005, a memorial service was held to honor the memory of the 51 people who perished 65 years earlier and to dedicate a plaque with their names and the names of others who died at Hercules Kenvil Works from 1917 onward. The plaque is located near the Memorial Garden at Horseshoe Lake Park, Succossona, New Jersey. So that pretty much does it for this episode. I did a bunch of research. I just felt like sharing it and making a video out of it or an episode about it. Like I said, this isn't necessarily going to be the normal thing, but sometimes I just get in the mood to be creative, and this is one of the outlets that I'd love to use for that. So if you enjoy it, let me know. You can leave a like on the video or wherever you're listening to it. You can share it, you don't have to, but that'd be kind of cool if you did or whatever. But again, no big deal. But just try and give as much feedback as possible because I really don't plan on stopping this, and I'd like to make it as enjoyable for as many people as possible. So again, thank you for coming to this episode of A Little Bit About Something. It kind of has a ring to it. But yeah, so thank you again, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the amount of time before I put out another episode.